What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a post All-Star break edition of SSPN Live. Ethan, how you doing, my guy?
I'm doing very well, Jude. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty good too. And we were just talking about the show rundown before we got in here, and I forgot one thing. This isn't planned. Like I genuinely just forgot it.
Mm.
The last post game that we did was against the Toronto Raptors, and then you were able to go to the Mavs game that Thursday, which was the last game before the All-Star break. And while that was not the best game to watch, although we did start 26-11, and then we took Wemby out and things went downhill, which is kind of the story of the season.
Mm.
Um, there were some pretty cool things that happened to you at that game. I don't know if you want to talk about them. You can at least talk about your game experience if you want to talk about that. What
Mm.
was that Thursday Mavs game like before the All-Star break?
It was incredible. Well, it's an incredible experience. Obviously, the win didn't pan out. We ended up really losing that second half pretty badly, but that first quarter was incredible for the Spurs. The run Wemby was able to go on was fantastic to watch, and Daniel Gafford. I thought he was going to be difficult for Wemby because he wasn't when in the Wizards game. Wasn't the case for the first half, but that second half we really imploded in that third quarter. Kyrie Irving got hot. Obviously, we lost the game by I think 20 points or something like that. But I was at the game, pretty good seats. I don't know if you could see that.
I can.
And I went with my dad's old family friends. They were lovely. I won't say their names on the podcast, but they were fantastic, great time, and they have a relationship with one of the players. So after the game, I was able to shake hands and meet Mr. Keldon Johnson. Excuse my chest being out in the picture, but um, he was awesome, dude. Like really humble guy, down to earth. I know this is like a small detail, but like we had maybe like a 10-minute conversation at the beginning. Obviously, like, hey, my name's Ethan, and then at the end, he remembered my name and he was like, hey, Ethan, great to meet you. Dabbed up again. Real solid dude. Signed my shirt. It was otherworldly to me. It was my first time I've actually met a Spur, like any Spur.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like he's so tall, he's so athletic, giant hand, and he's super humble, like down to earth. But at the same time, like I was kind of shell shocked, like forgetting like all the things I had planned to say to him. Just like so cool to meet you. And he's literally 1 year older than me, so it's like not even like an age difference.
Right.
But it was an incredible experience to say the least.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, as much as that game did go downhill with
Hmm.
the great start we had, and specifically Victor's great start,
Yeah.
I just have to ask you, what was it like seeing Victor playing in person for the first time?
It's insane how everyone in the Mavericks arena was there to watch him, and he really, like, sucks the air out of the room. Like, when he has the
Hmm.
ball, it's, like, basically silent because everyone's just like, "What's he gonna do?" And to watch someone at his size, like, I know it's stereotypical, everyone says it, but his size on TV versus in person is like vastly different. Like he is head and shoulders over everybody else. And to watch what he's able to do with the ball, as far as being a ball handler, a facilitator, a shooter, um, it's you've never seen anything quite like this. I've seen Chris Stapps play before, who's also tall, lanky, and another
Right.
unicorn. Like you can't compare the two as far as like what they're how they're able to manipulate the game and play with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm jealous of you for a multitude of reasons there, Ethan. But as I'm glad that all that stuff happened, because with the way that the game went, I'm sure that still, that made things a little bit better for you there.
Cherry on top, cherry on top. And at one point, I was, blabbering kind of like I am right now to Keldon, and I was like, "Man, we watch every game. Like, it's so cool to finally meet you." And he goes, "Yeah, man, it's been a rough year." And I was like, don't even matter. Bro. Like, we're still watching. We still care about the team. We love that you're out here playing hard every single night." And he was like, "I appreciate that." So real solid, dude.
That's good to hear because, with all I'm sure that was nice for him to hear too. And I know it's like, yes, you're meeting him with, certain connections there. So it's like
Yeah.
probably everybody who meets him in person is going to be nice.
Mhm.
But I'm sure with all of the internet talk that just in today's era, not even just for the losing teams, but that the winning teams get,
Mhm.
that was probably a nice little refresher for him. Like, hey, there are some true diehards out there that are riding with you regardless. You know what I mean?
I hope so. I hope I wasn't just like, oh god, this guy's 23 and he's 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 this into the game. But yeah, I hope that's how he got what he got out of it.
Right, right. You hope so. But anyways, we've got some other stuff to talk about because after that, Ethan, we had All-Star Weekend, and there were
Mhm,
actually 3 Spurs represented.
mhm.
So I'm going to dish it to you. You did get to watch the Rising Stars Challenge, correct?
I did, yes. Obviously, Jeremy Sohan's team, Team Jalen, won the whole thing. So shout out to him. He didn't have like a crazy, like he didn't contribute all that much. It was really Benedict Mathurin and everybody else. Like Jeremy just kind of out there, unfortunately. But it was still nice to see a Spur on the stage when they actually won the entire thing. And Wemby's team lost to Team Detlef Schrempf, which is the G Leaguers, which was a shocker to say the least. But they clearly wanted it more. Like they were out there competing while Team Powell was kind of trying to put on a show a little bit, and it, everybody was having a difficult time getting the ball to Wemby. Like statistically looking at it, like he had a good game, but nobody could get him the ball. Kind of how we struggled early in the season with the Spurs. It was very reminiscent of that. It's like, okay, it's not just our guys. It's difficult for everybody to play with Victor Wembanyama because he's such a special talent. But he lost, so it was a little disappointing not to see the Chet versus Wemby matchup in the finals, but I'm still glad at least one Spur got the W that night.
Yeah, absolutely. And you took the words out of my mouth on that point you were mentioning. Like, I know it's a game to 40 in the Rising Stars Challenge. It's not the most like, what's the word I'm looking for? Translatable,
Yeah.
thing to an actual NBA game. But at the same time, like they got Podzimski mic'd up before the game, and he's like, "I'm lobbing it to you every time, Victor. This is gonna be so easy." Like he didn't say it's gonna be so easy, but from his body language and the way that he was talking, you could kind of tell that's how he felt. And quickly they realized that it's not that easy. It's not that simple. When they get on the court, and you and I were texting back and forth about that. And I don't think that's the end all be all. Like, yes, it's the Rising Stars Challenge. I will say that it seemed like the Rising Stars Challenge, they go a little bit harder than the All
For
Star
sure.
game.
Most
So,
definitely.
yeah, right. Not even a comparison. There's a
Mm.
lot of talk about that right now. But that aside, Ethan, it was a little bit of an example of some of the stuff that we've been talking about through the year that there is an adjustment to playing with him regardless of the situation.
I think we actually only had one lob to Wimby in the entire first game that he ended up losing, which was, and not to point fingers at anybody, but Cason Wallace shooting 5 threes and missing all of them is terrible. Like, please stop shooting.
And there were a couple guys on there that were just kind of out there running. I don't mean this in a bad way,
No,
but
no.
I'm just thinking about this, something that's popping into my head while you're talking, like Jabari Smith,
Hmm.
not going 100%, understandably, where that entire G League team was just going as hard as possible. They
Oh
they
man.
obviously got kind of gassed out, having to play back-to-back games there.
Hmm.
But as much as it is the G League team, and that was not expected, I mean, Mac McClung was all over All-Star Weekend.
Hmm.
And Alondas Williams, he was a dude who really showed out for them. He's a guy who's had 55 in the G League. So as Oscar Tshiebwe, I'm
Hmm.
butchering his last name, but I'm talking about the Pacers guy. He was a beast on the interior. I think he had a poster on somebody too. If maybe I'm misremembering that,
I
but
can't remember.
regardless, all those guys were out there playing for contracts. They had a little bit more motivation. Than Team Wemby, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And they were doing a really good job defensively. Last point I'll make on this, because obviously, like you said, not much to take away from this kind of game.
Right.
But like they were poking the ball out of everybody's hands for Team Pal. Like nobody could just hold it. Like they were getting it picked so easily. Wemby included. So they were playing great D.
Yeah, they came out motivated, wanted something to prove. Jamal Crawford was the only one who even initiated,
Hmm.
or thought of the thought that they could potentially win the thing because of kind of that motivation factor,
Hmm.
and also because there is a little bit of translation with the style of play whenever it comes to the G League and the NBA. Obviously, the talent level is not there; it's not comparable on any level, but the style of play. That's why you've seen so many kids that are going to play in the NBL or the G League. And I know the NBL is a different thing, but other than college basketball, the pace in both of those leagues is much more similar to the NBA. But we'll see with all that stuff how the rest of this how the Ignite plays out, Ethan. Because I know this is a little off topic, but I saw an article that with just basically with NIL in college, and I know that's a whole nother conversation. I'm not trying to get too deep in the weeds here, but a lot of the advantages that the G League Ignite team presented whenever it was first introduced aren't necessarily there anymore, because when in the first season, like NIL wasn't a thing yet in college, or if it was like the first year, and it wasn't as built out. As there weren't as many opportunities to make money like there is now, at certain universities. So Adam Silver was talking about it in the press conference over All-Star Weekend, and he did like a whole segment or answer basically on just the future of Ignite and how they're not necessarily sure how that's going to work moving forward. As of right now, they're still recruiting a lot of top prospects, so maybe there's still a couple seasons on the horizon. But anyways, that's just going to be something interesting to watch moving forward. And another thing that I'll just touch on here, just because we're on the subject of G League Ignite, is Ron Holland, who is a potential, guy that the Spurs could draft in the lottery, depending on how the lottery goes. He is going to be out for the rest of the year. So all of the Ron Holland tape that we've got, it's done now. So yeah, I guess that's just something that kind of ties into the Spurs a little bit. I doubt that, there's probably, we'll see if he ends up even being in our range, depending on the lottery, like I said. But here on February 22nd, potentially something that could apply to the Spurs if, we end up falling a little bit in the lottery, because I think he'll be kind of in that like 8 to 12 range, maybe 6.
I would be shocked if we fell to 6 to 8. Like, if we're not top 5, then that's blasphemous, because we've been pretty much like bottom 2 teams the entire year.
I know. It's just with the lottery, you never know how it can work out.
You never know. But I have nothing to say about Ron Holland. I haven't done any research on any prospects this season yet, Jude, except for Alexander Sarr, and that's only because he keeps popping up on my like TikTok and Instagram reels. But that's about it.
It's all that overtime elite clout, man. They just make all the reels. I know he's not even playing for them right now, but I'm telling you, it stems from then.
Is he going to be in this draft? Am I mistaken?
Yes. No, he's like the number 1 prospect. Yeah.
Ooh.
So
that'll be a nice video for the future. Like, if we get the number 1 pick, let's say theoretically, that next video we make, Jude, is going to be, do you take Alexander Sarr, because he's a 7'1" big, basically like 4. We don't have to get into it now, but that'll be an interesting debate, because it's so obvious that the number 1 thing we need is point guard play.
Yes. But in that situation, it's funny. I don't want to get too deep into that, but like, he is much more of a 4. Like he's 7'1", but he's 205. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's even more perimeter based than Wemby. And then on top of that, he played a season with Dominic Barlow on the overtime elite team when he was like 16, after playing for Real Madrid in the Euro League when he was older. And then now he's playing in the NBL in Perth. So that's even more professional experience. But the other thing I was going to mention is he's French. So you got the Barlow connection. You could potentially have French twin towers. But there's also Jeremy Sohan there, and like you said, with needs. But then again, the Spurs always just pick best player available. That's a whole nother conversation down the line that we'll get into. But there's a little bit of draft stuff from me and Ethan.
Jeremy's going to play point guard next year again.
Yep. We're going to draft Alex.
That's the solution.
We're going to draft Alex Sarr, and Jeremy's going to start at point guard, and it's going to be fine.
Yep, perfect. I'm settled.
Oh my gosh. Obviously just joking for those of you who may have took that seriously. I doubt many of you did. But there was also some other events at the All-Star Weekend that we're going to talk about here, Ethan. So there was the Skills Challenge. Not really too much to take away from this. Me and you were talking about it before we went live. I thought Wemby did a solid job. I think he did better than Scotty Barnes. I'll say that.
For sure. Scotty Barnes dribbled it off his ankle, like within the first 10 feet of the challenge. Can we just, the only thing I want to say about it, Wemby, great job, represented the Spurs. It was nice to see a Spur out there for the first time since Tony Parker. Can we just remodel the entire skills challenge to be what it used to be? Like, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it when it was just individual versus individual, and it was actually a challenge. Remember how small the pass hole used to be?
Yes.
It was like the size of a basketball. Now it's gigantic. Like, it's too gimmicky and weird. I don't want the court. Make it a regular court. I don't want the LED court. Let's go back to basics and get this thing right, please, for the love of God.
Yeah, I mean, this gets into a whole nother All-Star Weekend discussion, but I was talking about this with some coaches when
Hmm.
I was covering a game, some basketball coaches specifically as well, because they're not coaching anymore. But anyways, that could go into a whole nother thing. Regardless, I was having some conversations with some coaches, um, and they were talking about how it just kind of feels like it's just. I mean, when we grew up, it just felt so much more like important, not just
Hmm.
from the game, but like to the dunk contest. The 3-point contest, I feel like is the thing that's aged the best.
For
Like that's
sure.
kind of still the same. But like the guys we have in the dunk contest, I don't even mean disrespect. It's just like you don't have like, like your all NBA players, lining up to be in the dunk contest. I know did Jalen Brown end up doing it this time?
He did. He was an
Okay.
all-star, yeah.
So I got to give him a little bit of credit for trying to do it. But like I don't know. And it also goes back to the game itself. Like back in the day, it feels like when we were growing up, like when we were kids watching this, like Kobe was trying to score. You know what I mean? When everybody was wearing their own jerseys, stuff like that. I remember even Jason Kidd like out there playing hard in one of the All-Star games. Now, I know it still was never the same intensity of an actual game. Um, but regardless, it was a much better, not to call it a product, but when I say it's a much better product, I just mean like it was a much more competitive
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
environment, I
It
guess is the way that I would describe it.
it felt like they used to like play an actual game. Go out there, play a real game, but just try a few more things that you would never try at a real game. Like
Right.
throw that lob that might be a little ill-advised, make it a flashy pass rather than a simple bounce pass. Like things like that. Just spruce it up a little bit. And now it's basically just half-court shots the entire game.
Yeah. And then like Cat scores 50 but doesn't even win MVP. Like I'm not saying that he should have won MVP, but like
He lost the
that's
game.
that's when and see I didn't even know what team he was on. That's
The
I mean
West.
I'm going to be real. I watched the first quarter
Hmm.
and then I told myself I was going to go back. I went to make some food and then I never went back.
Well, Draymond literally roasted Cat on his alternate cast. He said, "This is looking like an old Minnesota game. Cat has 40 and they're down 30 or something like that." And I was like, "Oh my god, that's so personal." He hates Minnesota. I don't really know why, but
Oh, Draymond. Draymond, Draymond, Draymond. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not.
no. The 3-point contest is, you're right, it aged the best. But even still, I don't know why we have an entire Moneyball rack. And I don't know why we have the
Yeah.
two deep balls. Like, what happened to just like it you can't compare anymore because back in the day they had 5 racks, each had one money ball. So when a guy dropped 20, it was like really impressive. But now guys are dropping 29 and 26 and 27. It's like, man, what's the point?
Yeah. The saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, Ethan.
Well, they broke it even more.
Yeah, they tried to fix it or just make it better. They didn't even need to fix it, and then they ended up breaking it in the process. That's kind of what it feels like.
Last thing. Sorry, now you got me on a
No,
tangent.
go ahead.
What you said about the dunk contest is so true. But like even like recent history, when we're like middle school, high school, it wasn't necessarily all stars or all NBA
Right.
players, but it was at least like lottery picks, like recent lottery picks that were trying to make a name for themselves, like Zach LaVine, Aaron
Exactly.
Gordon. Like it was guys that you were excited to see. It wasn't, no disrespect, but it wasn't the Toppin twin that's in the G League and Mac McClung, who's a great dunker, also in the G League. Um,
Right.
it's completely lost its value to me.
That's really it. Since the Gordon Levine dunk contest, it's
Hmm.
just it. They
Paul
I don't know.
George, John
I don't.
Wall,
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it just is not. It just hasn't been the same, Ethan.
J.R. Smith. Like we had some like really solid names that eventually became all stars. I don't
Right.
think I don't think Jacob Toppin's going to be an all star.
Right. Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You put it perfectly there, Ethan. But there was one more thing at All Star Weekend that we got to talk about. My boy Dom Beasy in the G League Up Next game, which
Mm.
was basically the same format as the Rising Stars, except in the first game they played to 30 instead of 40. Um, he was a part of Team Strictly because there were all these influencers. I don't know who Strictly is.
Me neither.
Um, But all of the coaches were YouTuber influencers. Maybe that's bad of us since we're on YouTube ourselves. Maybe they should have put us as the coaches. That's really what I'm realizing. Anyways, no. So they get on the broadcast and they're talking to Team Strictly's coach, right? And they're like asking him about their team. They did it for both coaches before the game. And he's like, we're from Minnesota. We really like Luka Garza. We think he's the best player in the G League, and his G League stats are actually insane. Like when I first heard that, I was like, "Are they sure? Is he really like?" Like when I first heard that, I was like, "Oh no, we've got Homer coaches. This is Dom's not going to get any shine." That's what I was thinking. But yeah, Luka Garza is averaging like 36 and 13 in the G League. So I actually can't take anything away from him there.
Wow.
But we fed him the ball, and unfortunately he made like 2-3 shots the whole game. And like took a bunch. I don't think he took 3. I think he was 0 for 3 from 3. But Dom was starting. Okay. And he had a nice little floater where he pump faked someone from the 3-point line, and it was actually like a really long floater. But he drained it first shot. He had one time where he dribbled the ball up and did like a kind of a nasty dribble crossover. I'm not going to lie to you. It reminded me of the OTE highlights, the overtime elite highlights that I saw from Dom Barlow way back in the day when we first signed him to the 2-way. And that's what we had to go off of. And, overtime elite at that point was, they didn't have an Eamon and Nassar Thompson, getting drafted. That was the first player coming out. So you didn't really know, the legitimacy of it and everything like that. Now we can look back and be like, oh, he was playing with Alex Sarr and against the Thompson twins. Like, yes, it wasn't a crazy league, you know what I mean? But it was still worthy competition, future NBA top lottery picks that he was playing against. So it was cool to see him like do the stuff that Pop is never going to allow him to do. But then he had 7 points total. I can't remember where the other 2 came from. Oh, it was a full court, drove up the lane. It wasn't the same dribble moves. He passed off on that one, but he did have a full court rebound coast to coast where he had a nice spin move right at the rim and got a layup on a guy in transition. And then they were down 22-20. So if they miss here, and then the other team gets a bucket, they're going to 30. So that kind of gives them a 2-possession lead, late in the game, if you will. So this was a big moment in the G League next up game.
Huge moment.
I know, I'm kind of laughing about it as I'm saying that. But Dom pulled up in transition and hit a 3 in a dude's face to give them the lead, and then never got the ball for the rest of the game.
Well,
and they lost by like 3, I think. All things considered, he had a nice performance. That's really the bottom line. So shout out to Dom. He's back with the Austin Spurs. So they play tomorrow against the Oklahoma City Blues. So I'm going to be locked into that.
Rivalry game.
Big one.
This one's for it all. Maybe.
Yep.
I don't know. Well, that's disappointing to hear that they lost, but I didn't watch the game. So I'm glad Dom at least had a couple highlights and a couple nice plays. It sounded at least like it was more competitive than the other All-Star game.
It was. And he got to, like I said, he got to show off some like saucy moves. The 3 was really the only thing that was like just like a spot up shot that he had. So I was glad that he kind of got to show off a little bit of the jelly that he has in his game. Now, granted, maybe it's a little bit easier to show that off against other guys in the G League up next game. But at the same time, that's just stuff that he doesn't really get to do in Austin or San Antonio, Ethan.
For now, Jude. For now.
That's the key, right? But we do have one more thing that we're going to talk about in this All-Star Weekend recap, Ethan, that kind of pertains to the future of the Spurs a little bit. We'll see if all of these rumors just end up being rumors, because that can be the case. But Wemby was very, very friendly with a certain point guard on a team that we just traded a former point guard of ours to, and that is, of course, Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks. There's been a lot of rumors about this. There's been some reports that have come out and said that the Spurs and the Hawks had conversations at the deadline for a potential Trae Young move. There's also just a lot of smoke around the Hawks right now with how their season is going. and them potentially moving not just one of DeJounte or Trae Young in the offseason, but potentially even both. Um, the Hawks are kind of, it seems like they are in a situation where they want to make a move of some sort um, to kind of free up this backcourt that hasn't worked out exactly as they've wanted it to. I think they're open to also maybe keeping one of the two as well. But it seems like that's I've been seeing a lot of it on social media. That the Hawks are looking to make some moves this offseason. And so then you see Trae and Wemby, throughout the All-Star weekend. I know they were talking it up at the Skills Challenge. I believe that he might have even been at the Rising Stars Challenge as well. But I might be thinking of Tyrese Halliburton there. I know he was on the broadcast in the finals. But I believe that Trae might have been there as well on the sideline.
He was.
But okay. So yeah, Ethan, I guess I'm just asking you, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how friendly they looked talking to each other?
They definitely looked friendly. I don't know if you saw that thing where the jacket Wemby's wearing in the Louis Vuitton ad is the same jacket that Trey had on during the Rising Stars game when they were visiting with one another. So people were like, it was like a Marvel Easter egg. They were like, oh, the two things match. Maybe that means they're getting together. Listen, I think Trey Young gets way too much hate personally. I know he's not without his deficiencies. A1 being his defense, being probably one of the worst in the NBA as far as being a point guard is concerned. But other than that, I think everything else would fit. I don't see him as a selfish player. I know other people sometimes say that. I think he's actually one of the most unselfish players in the league. His assist numbers are crazy. I know at times he can have high turnover numbers, but that kind of comes with it unless you're Tyrese Halliburton. He's an unbelievable shooter. He can fill up the box score. And what's the number one complaint we've had about Wemby, like just in general, is that we don't have a dynamic point guard that can get him the ball pretty much every single time. And that's what Trae Young is. He's a field general. He's made Clint Capella a very rich man. He's made John Collins a very rich man. He's made a lot of people's lives a lot easier. And we can't forget what he was able to do with the Hawks. Was it 3 years ago now? 3 or 4 years ago when they
something
beat
like
the
that.
Ben Simmons Sixers
Right.
and made it all the way to the conference finals on a not very good team. We saw what he did on the biggest stage in the world against the Knicks in Madison Square Garden. He's capable of doing that kind of thing. I like the move, personally. Will it happen? I don't know. Because I think that the Hawks can probably get more talent back from a different team. But can they get as much draft capital from another team? I don't know. The only other team I would say that could offer a lot of draft capital, I think there's two. The Knicks have draft capital, but they don't need a point guard. And Oklahoma City has draft capital, and they really don't need a point guard. So if we could find a way to not give up too much talent and kind of keep the core together, I hate to say it, but honestly, I wouldn't mind the trade, Jude. I would not mind the trade.
I wouldn't either. And I wouldn't mind a different move, maybe for like even a different player of similar caliber.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why I brought this up. We're getting, it's the All-Star break. That's kind of like a timestamp in the NBA season, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. We got 27 games left. We kind of know where the Spurs are at right now. Maybe you see a couple more wins because of, teams resting guys late in the season, like we saw last year. And that'll be interesting. That's another conversation point that I want to get to here in a little bit. But will we have a worse record than last season? That would just be very, if that happened, I think context is very key, and the depth of the league this year is just absolutely nuts. And then also the adjusting to Wemby part, like we mentioned earlier, as well as what another thing we've mentioned at nauseum with realizing that this is the first season that these guys have really played together with all of the injuries that we had last year. But with all of that being said, Ethan, we have a lot of draft capital. We have potentially, I mean, with the way that the Raptors are looking right now, I'm feeling less and less confident in potentially getting that pick. You never know with the lottery, but that's not a guarantee. You are going to have your pick, right? And it's going to be a very attractive pick. And eventually, if this team doesn't develop the way that you may think some of them will. Not saying that's even happened at this point, but just speaking hypothetically for the future here. There might have been a point eventually in this rebuild, not even might have. It was probably more of a likelihood that there were going to be some guys that you hit and miss on in the draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were going to have to make a move to elevate yourself with all of this capital that you've gained. You're not gaining this capital for no reason. Look at Oklahoma City. That's really who we've compared it to the most, with Sam Presti, having the Spurs connections, et cetera, et cetera. So eventually a move like this was probably going to happen at some point. It just kind of depends on when. And I'm not even completely convinced that it does happen this offseason, especially depending on what happens in the draft,
Mm-hmm.
or the lottery more specifically. But I do think, like you said, it's not a move I would hate. I wouldn't hate if we continued to develop with the people we have. We did this for another year, see what jumps guys take. Maybe you have I'm not going to bet on anything, but maybe you do kind of have something more similar to what we were expecting coming into this season, with the guys actually having a full season under each other, knowing Wemby more, Wemby taking a jump, all of these other young players taking another jump because of their youth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like I said, I wouldn't be mad at making a move as well, because of the fact that you have all this capital. And if you have the opportunity to get somebody like that, and I know that a lot of people are clamoring for accelerating the timeline. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I'm not necessarily clamoring for that,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I'm not opposed to using our assets if a move that we like, gets on the table.
Trae Youngs don't grow on trees. So it's very rare for a guy that can pretty much guaranteed get you 25 points and 10 assists a game to be available in a trade. Like, I think what you're saying, Jude, is like you're not necessarily clamoring for one right now, but what are the odds someone of this caliber is available 2 years from now? Like, probably not very high. And we'd really be
Mm-hmm.
banking on the fact that one of these picks is going to jump quickly into that all-star caliber point guard role. Even if we even draft a point guard, like, who knows? And are we going to attract a free agent? Probably not. Not at that caliber, I don't think. Like, I feel like if we're gonna keep an all-star like a Trae Young, you have to trade for him just so he can see how great San Antonio is and kind of have like stock in the team. So when re-signing time comes, he's like, oh yeah, you know what? I'm already here. I like Vic. I like Pop. Like, let's get this thing going. And for the record, I would not trade 3 players right now. 3 players I consider like untouchable on the Spurs roster, and that's Victor, Devin, and Jeremy. I wouldn't trade those 3 guys.
I feel like that's probably, if it came down to it for me, those are, if I'm making a 2K rebuild in real life, Ethan, those are my 3 untouchables as well.
And this year's pick.
I mean, if it's Trae Young, that would be interesting. I might be willing to give up this year's pick in that move if it comes down to it. I know I know it's a lot, but like you said, I mean, what Trae Young, where was he drafted? You know what I mean? Like, if we have the number
3,
4 pick,
4, yeah.
right? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it really? I mean, yes, it would suck. It would be really nice to keep that if you can move it. If you can get the trade across, without that, obviously, I'm down with that. But that may be something that the Hawks, are like, hey, if we're gonna do this, we we want to have, that's something we want in return, because of what you mentioned of maybe guys that we considered untouchable. And okay, those are 3 of the most appealing players on the team. Obviously, we're not moving Wemby. But you see what I'm saying? Like, to account for not getting one of those guys, they may want, a top 10 pick. But really, this is a conversation that we could explore the ins and outs of it,
Mm-hmm.
forever, Ethan. But at the same time, it's just, we'll see how it plays out. You know what I mean? It's not, like I said, we could go through all the ins and outs of it, but it's really just a wait and see thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were not trying to insinuate. I see some of y'all in the comments. We were not trying to insinuate that Victor was untradeable or tradable in any way.
I think he's saying stop it as if Devin and like he's the only one that's untradeable. Devin and Jeremy are,
Oh,
I think is what he's
okay,
saying. And the
gotcha.
only reason I say that they're not tradable in this instance is because if we give up those two for Trey, then we really have a depleted team. And that's just Trey and Vic. And I don't think we're going to be that much better.
Yeah, I mean that's just my opinion right
Yeah.
now.
We just
Jeremy's
need
20,
pieces.
20 years old. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you.
No,
Yeah,
you're good.
like we're seeing him continue to show flashes. Like we mentioned earlier, he's younger than Brandon Miller, for
Hmm.
example. And I mean, I think the Spurs also view Devin that way. That's why they signed him to a 5-year contract for 136 million. Um, but yeah, that's also I mean, I think the two-man game that he's developing and also how I think he is someone who could fit next to a player
A
like
Trey Young.
Trey Young,
Absolutely.
and play off of him. And we've talked about that, uh, at nauseum as well whenever it comes to Devin and the way that he kind of his versatility in his fit, on how we build the roster, regardless of how we build the roster moving forward.
Agreed.
But I like what Victor says in the comments here. He says Victor is untouchable. Another untouchable is Sissoko.
Heck
CD,
yeah.
CD's on that. He's on that full time contract. Ethan,
Hmm.
we need to
I
get
love
no two
CD.
way.
I need to see some CD minutes in the actual Spurs roster, actually.
Late in the season, I think I wouldn't mind throwing that out there. Like in the
Might
last
as
2 weeks of the year, I'm not mad at it. Let him spend a little bit more time in Austin,
well. Hmm.
just because of the injury that he had,
For sure.
um, and also the G League season finishes up before the NBA season ends, if I remember correctly. So maybe after the G League season's over too, that would be
Mm.
a good opportunity for
Yeah.
that. Um, but with all of that being said, Ethan, what are kind of your thoughts? We kind of jumped into a lot of the off season there and some other stuff that I wanted to talk about just with it being the All-Star break, but getting back to this year. Um, what are just your end of year thoughts for the last 27 games of this season?
Oh, man. It's going to be a rough last 27 games. I don't envision us suddenly turning the page and becoming world beaters in any way. However, I would like to see some steady improvements from guys like Blake Wesley, Victor Wembanyama as far as consistency and understand controlling that fatigue that we've kind of seen start to attack his rookie season late in the year. Um, and really just better cohesion overall. Like we've seen improvements defensively, we've seen it in halves, we've seen it in quarters. We haven't seen it much for full games. I think maybe one or two times we've seen a full game played completely the way we're supposed to play with pace and good defense. I would like to see a couple more of those as the season comes to an end.
Yeah, and I think we will to an extent. Like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be teams that are resting guys for the playoffs, and we're
Mm.
going to take advantage in some of those scenarios. I think it will be reminiscent, to last season in that way. But I'm really not convinced, Ethan. With 27 games left, I am not convinced that we get 12 wins in those 27 games. And that
Right.
is what we need to have a better record than last season, because last season we finished 22 and
Mm.
60. And so, I was just thinking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, the likelihood is probably that we do finish with a worse record than last season. Um, and then I'm just thinking about, oh, what does that do for the offseason talking points and stuff like that?
Mm.
Um, and I'm sure there will be a lot of that. There will be a lot of craziness and a lot of, just in my opinion, outrageous stuff. Um, but with all of that being said, Ethan, I still have enjoyed this season much more than I did last year. And that's probably just because we get to watch Victor every single
Hmm.
time that we turn on a Spurs game. Um, but even then, like when you see the way that we've been able to see the players, it does really all revolve around him at the end of the day. I was trying to, try to think of a way to put it to give some other guys credit. Like Devin, it really has been fun to watch his development this season. I know it's been rough for Jeremy, but it's also been nice to see him rebound after how the point guard experiment went. And then getting back to Devin, like I said, just getting to see him be consistent, over show what he showed us in the 36 games we saw last year, over a now at this point, almost 60 game span. There's been a lot of fun stuff to see there. But mainly the thing that has been fun to watch is them building chemistry with Victor. And then when you finally see things right, even though it's not consistent, you can start to see the flashes of how things could potentially look when the Spurs build some consistency and get some more experience under their belt.
1,000%. 1,000%. And you know what? Just to add one more thing to this last 27 games, I'm going to go out on a limb here, Jude. I'm going to say the player that turns it around the most in these last 27 games and plays the most better, if that makes sense.
I know who you're going for. I already know. I can read your mind. Go ahead.
I don't know. Malachi Branham.
Okay, I can't read your mind. Never mind. I take it back. I thought you were going to go Zach.
No, I'm going to go with Malachi Branham. I don't think Zach's done for this year. I think the rest of the year will be the same. But I think Malachi Branham has an opportunity here. We saw him get a few more games under his belt as we approached All-Star break, where he was getting meaningful minutes again. I think he turns it around and comes back to not like crazy great, but just closer to what we saw from him last season.
I mean, he's going to have the opportunity. That's for sure. And, when you mentioned that last year, he kind of turned it on later in the year too, which we mentioned that was similar to kind of how it worked his freshman year at Ohio State. Now, we don't want that, as much as that was fun last season to talk about, we don't necessarily want that to be a trend for Malachi. We wanted to be able to build that consistency throughout a season. And we also don't want the success to just kind of be also in the end of the year, where, like I mentioned, where they're playing maybe right, you're playing some third stringers, et cetera, et cetera. But that's interesting, Ethan. To be honest with you, I'm not as confident in that, but he definitely has the opportunity to. So we'll see if you end up being right on that. And that's something to keep an eye on, because with him getting Doug's minutes now, like, there's going to be more of a spotlight on that. Like, because you just said that, I'm going to be paying attention to that more in the Kings game tonight. Which is a 9:00 start time because we're on the West Coast, which is why we're doing a pregame stream. I don't even know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but that's just kind of, I don't know if we've ever done a pregame stream before. And we're going to get into that game here in a little bit, but we also wanted to recap the All-Star break and talk about all that stuff.
Well said, sir.
Okay, we'll get to some of the comments, though, before we get to this preview here, Ethan. Victor says, if we trade for a PG, I honestly wouldn't want Young. What about Darius Garland better on defense? I mean, if I would take either. To be honest with you, I don't think that Darius Garland, maybe he's on the untouchable list for the Cavs. I don't know. Maybe he's not, but I think that Trae Young is much more available than Darius Garland when it comes to that.
100%. 100%. That's the thing that always bugs me in the comments, is people are like, let's just go trade for LeBron. And it's like, he's not available. Or like, let's go trade for Tyrese Halliburton was a big one early in the season. We had several people saying, let's go trade for Tyrese Halliburton. It's like, yeah, sure. Okay. Go do that. He's not available. Trae Young's available.
Yeah, the Cavs are now the 2 seed in the East. I checked that today because I realized the Bucks, man. I don't want to get too off topic in the NBA here, but man, the Bucks. Like, if you go back to firing Coach Bud, like, what are you? Anyways, and then you see what's happened when you bring in Doc Rivers midway through the season. And it's like, I feel like they should be better than they are right now. Like, when you have Dame next to Giannis, this is not how this year should have gone. And maybe it would regardless with Adrian Griffin. We don't know some things behind the scenes, but when you're 30-13 and then you bring in a new head coach midway through the year, and then now, you've got Cleveland, and Cleveland's really good, but Cleveland's surpassing you, you're falling in the standings. Yeah, not to get too off topic there. Going back to the question though, I would love Darius Garland too. Like I said, I just don't think he is available.
I want Steph Curry.
Don't we all, Ethan?
I want Steph.
Don't we all? Okay, last thing before we get to the Kings and Lakers preview, Ethan. This was something that during the Mavs game, I was texting with some friends and in a group chat where we talk about a bunch of stuff, but we talk about the Spurs a lot. And we've been talking about this all year. It's like we've been saying this, but we haven't been saying it this way. And you'll get what I mean as I continue. But one of my friends, and this was after they went up 26-11, and then we took Wemby out, and things happened like they normally do when that happens. I was just so frustrated, and I was spamming in there, and I was like, oh, this is just tough. And it was also cool because like we weren't doing a post game, so I was kind of just like I was full fan mode. You know what I mean? Watching it. And one of my friends just goes, "Spurs are tankers, Jude." and it was like light bulb. Like we've been talking about this. Like I said, we've basically been saying that. And he brought up, another point that he brought up was the minutes restriction. And that's something that we're and yes, Wemby has been gassed, but also like think about how many single digit games we've had, Ethan, where if Wemby plays another 6 or 7 minutes, like that might be the difference with the way that he's impacted the game this year.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not wrong.
There's been a lot of subtle stuff. There was another thing that I also wanted to mention. Well, the Doug trade. There you go. You were talking about Malachi. And while we talked about that beforehand, that, we agree for the future of the team, that's going to be better anyway, because we need to just see what Malachi has. You know what I mean? More so than Doug. But that's another little like subtle tanking type move in the last 27 games of the year,
Yeah, I think the Spurs do a very, 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 very good job of disguising their tanking. We've done it for years.
Yeah. And Adam Silver's not going to be knocking on Brian Wright's door or Pop's door like, why aren't you playing Wemby more? Because he's the NBA's baby moving forward. So they're going to let all that slide. And there's probably some other stuff that I can't remember. But going back to last year, what I can remember is all of those guys not playing a full 82 games. Keldon, even I remember when we looked back at the game totals, like Keldon only played like 70 or something. Like it wasn't even as many as we thought, even though it felt like it was just him out there most of the year last season. Because it was, but like the amount of games that Jeremy and Devin played as well. And other guys too. It was just, there's a lot of little subtle things that they do to keep these draft odds where they're at, Ethan. And really, when you look at this rebuild, Victor had a great comment about patience earlier, when it comes to building, the way that the Spurs are building. And like I said, with the assets we have, maybe we do make a move that accelerates the timeline. But at the same time, if we're going to do this rebuild thing, kind of following that OKC path, like we've been talking about, you want to have the highest draft odds possible, because you're not going to be, at least at this point in year one with Wemby, like you're not going to be competing for the play-in as much as I thought that was a possibility before the season. And it's going to take some time to get there. So why would you not try to get the highest draft odds possible, even if you end up getting really unlucky and falling to like 6 or something? You know what I mean?
It's all part of the plan, Jude. It's all a part of the plan.
There you go, Ethan.
You're exposing the Spurs, Jude. I need you to stop talking.
Okay. My bad.
This would be like a Spurs like gun, just like at the back of your head.
Stop talking.
Supposed to be a fan of the show.
Don't tell all my secrets.
Yeah, literally.
Oh my gosh. We're going to trade these draft picks at some point, though. I know like OKC still has a ton of capital, but like there's going to be a time where they're not going to be able to pay everybody on their roster that they've drafted. And they're going to use those picks that they have to get more, above average, like role player type dudes to fill out the rest of the roster. So, it's not like we're going to go crazy and trade everything, but like I said, we're not going to use all those picks either.
True. Did they give up a pick for Gordon Hayward? Or what did they give up for Gordon Hayward?
I feel like such a bad podcast host, and I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that's going to be really interesting to watch.
I think they might have given up like 1 first.
Let me go here. Okay,
which is hilarious.
Thunder trade for Gordon Hayward details.
This is why we need like a third guy on the show just to do our research for us.
Okay, well, luckily the NBA has an article, and it popped up first. The Thunder receive Gordon Hayward. The Hornets receive Vasily Mychik. I don't know if you saw, he was helping out the Hornets a lot.
Hmm.
I was like, when I was seeing those highlights, I was like, maybe we should have got him. Trey Mann, Davis Bertans, cash considerations, and then 2 second-round picks.
2 seconds. Nice.
Okay, I know I've been saying we're going to get to the Kings and Lakers preview, but there's one more thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention earlier. On Trae Young. He's from Oklahoma, was born in Lubbock, Texas, would be a little bit more closer to home. Just saying. That's another thing there.
It would be, for everyone saying no, it would be crazy. It would be unbelievable to watch those two play together. Just think about that.
And what's his biggest deficiency, like you said? Defense. Right? What's the best team to go to A, get coached up on your defense, and 2, to have somebody behind you who with an 8-foot wingspan who can make up for you getting beat off the dribble?
Spurs. And if we can keep Jeremy and Devin as well, there you go. And a Julian Champagny.
No, but when you mentioned the Jeremy Devin point, that's actually key, because maybe we just do what we've been doing already with Trey Jones and throw Jeremy at the primary ball handler, and then
and on those nights that Trae Young is playing bad offense and we just got to take him out of the game, who's on the bench? Blake Wesley.
And you got Devin still, who can be another bucket getter off the dribble.
I love the trade.
Yeah, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm kind of seeing a lot of the trade. The trade. That's a good one.
TRAED.
What was I going to say? It's just, I'm seeing all the little nooks and crannies of things that I like. That's what I'll say. Here's what Eric says for the rest of the season. He says, I would not want any touches taken away from Wesley at this point. So he's on the Blake Wesley hype train, courtesy of yourself, Ethan.
Welcome aboard, Mr. Eric Pacina. It's very comfortable on board. There's not many on here.
There you go. All right, Ethan. Let's get into some games, some actual talk. It is 7:30 so we're about an hour and a half from tip in Sacramento. That we also play the Lakers tomorrow. This is going to be a tough back-to-back. I'm not really expecting us to win either game, but I do feel like, and I think we even talked about this when we previewed the Rodeo Road Trip, Ethan, that maybe this Lakers game could be a potential win for us, just because it's not his first game in Staples, but it's his first real game in Staples, even though it's not the Staples Center anymore. But it's always going to be that for me. What is it? Crypto.com now, or did they change it?
I think it went back to something. I think it might have gone back to Staples, actually.
Interesting. Regardless, first time playing the Lakers in LA in their stadium, which will soon be only their stadium, as the Clippers are getting a new arena here soon. I think that could potentially be a win for us, just because also, Devin wears 24 for a reason, grew up idolizing Kobe. That's going to be his first game in that arena, whatever it's called, since the erection of the Kobe statue. Maybe that wasn't the best word choice there, but since
yes, the erection of the Kobe statue, yes.
But the Kobe statue, since it was unveiled, how about
Kobe's
that?
Erection. Yes.
Or erected. I don't know.
Yes. Kobe's erected.
Point is, Devin's going to have some motivation to show out in the home of his idol, as well as Victor just being in LA. But tonight's game, I just don't have much confidence, Ethan.
Yeah, I have zero confidence. I think Sabonis is going to pick us apart defensively. I think he'll absolutely demolish the Spurs coming off a long break. I'm sure our legs will be tired. Our effort will be minimal. I'm just expecting one of those games. However, I think coming off of a loss tonight will have us motivated going into tomorrow, plus all the reasons that you just outlined about it being on a big stage like this, first game for Wemby in LA against the Lakers. Even if LeBron James is back tomorrow, I'm going to go with a Spurs win. We usually play well against the Lakers in general anyway. And plus we'll be warm coming off the back-to-back. So guys should have found their rhythm but they may otherwise not have tonight. One other side point about tonight's game, though. Last time we played the Kings, Zach Collins had an unbelievable game. I'm praying to God that happens again tonight because he needs one, especially coming off of this long break. He needs to get that confidence back.
And also, like I mentioned earlier, no Barlow tonight. No Barlow tonight if you get in foul trouble. You know what I'm saying? He's with the G League right now, so yeah, it would be really nice to have a bounce back performance from Zach. Just to come off the All-Star break. That's something I am interested in. I know you were saying and I agree with you. And I was looking at the standings. They're actually only 2 games apart right now, but it still kind of feels like the Kings and maybe I'm still a little drunk off of last season, but it kind of does feel I in my head I kind of view the Kings and the Lakers in a little bit of separate tiers, even though they're only 2 games apart in both the 8 and the 9 seed. But that also has to do with, once again, the depth and the jumps that a lot of other teams have made. OKC mainly is the one in the West this year. But yeah, I just I think the Kings are going to beat us. I think that De'Aaron is probably going to do his thing. Like you said, Sabonis is he'll probably get close to a triple-double, run some offense through the elbow, but then also be able to get some buckets on some guys in the interior and use his physicality. Wouldn't surprise me if he got Wemby a couple times. But also, because we're coming off rest, I can see us being rusty, Ethan, but I also could see us, being energetic as well. And maybe it will be that tonight we kind of get our rear end kicked, and then that shows up more in the Lakers game on Friday. But I think maybe there's a chance that we have a fast start tonight, a la Mavericks.
But ultimately, we're going to lose.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if the Spurs won tonight.
Wemby will get a couple highlights. He'll poster Sabonis at least once.
That would be nice.
Maybe revenge of Sohan the Destroyer. Maybe he'll get a nice poster again too.
That would be cool.
Would be cool. Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
Hey, well, Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, those are 2 guys we're going to be watching minutes for. We said Zach as well. And then, yeah, I mean, it really just comes down to the whole starting lineup, I guess, with what else I'm looking forward to.
Blake Wesley versus De'Aaron Fox would be crazy. 2 of the fastest guys.
That's a good match. It would be. I would like to see just at least a couple one-on-one possessions with them, just to see if Blake would be able to get some stops. But Robert Ball is here in the comments, and he says he heard that Sabonis was sick and listed as doubtful for tonight. So I am going to run over to the injury report for this game, Ethan, and see what that says. Well, Marcus Morris is out, not with team. That's the other thing. We still don't know for sure what's going to happen with that last roster spot. I saw Victor was mentioning earlier, he's talking about Killian Hayes. I wouldn't be completely opposed to that. It is interesting because we just sent Barlow back down to the G League. So I know as much as that seemed like the most obvious thing, Ethan, we'd also mentioned how, it wouldn't be the most surprising thing ever if we kept him on a 2-way, just because with him being 20 years old, also there is still some benefit for him playing in the G League to a certain extent. And then next year, you could elevate his contract, but it'll once again, that's another thing that by the end of the month will be resolved, Ethan.
Yeah, I'm cool with Killian Hayes, but my only question is he even going to play? With the way Blake's been playing, I'd much rather give Blake the backup minutes, and then at that point, why do we even have him?
He'd just be Devontae. Yeah, at that point. Now that you're mentioning that, Sabonis is listed as day-to-day with an illness, questionable for Thursday's game against the Spurs. He was a full participant in the Kings' morning shoot-around, Sean Cunningham of Fox 40 Sacramento reports. That tells me he's going to try to play then. If he participated in the shoot-around, that probably means it's optimistic.
I hope he doesn't, in which case I might change my prediction to at least competitive.
And that I'm glad you mentioned that, Ethan, because that's kind of my hope for tonight. If we can be in the game with like 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, even if we blow it in the last 7 minutes, if we can just get to like halfway through the fourth quarter and we're still in the game, and I'm like, I was excited enough to keep watching. That's just what I want tonight in the return to basketball.
Sorry, I dropped something. I wouldn't mind that either.
Shout out Robert Ball. We appreciate the thank you. He says, thank you for checking on that. It might have been, and it sometimes the things change during the day too. I've seen that. So like it could have been doubtful this morning. Like you might not necessarily be wrong either. We hoping to split this back to back, Ethan. Is that the goal? Is that the consensus?
I think so.
There you go. There you go. Well, I think that just about wraps this one up. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us. We hope you enjoy the late night game tonight and tomorrow over the weekend. I know today's not technically the weekend, but y'all get what I'm saying. And if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button below. You can follow us on Twitter to stay updated with everything at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, at Ethan_Quintero. And if you want to stay updated, or not stay updated, if you want to support the show and you'd like this hat or this shirt that I'm wearing, you can go ahead, or Ethan's there in the background. You can go ahead and scan this QR code, or you can go to the link in our description or the channel description, sspn.myspreadshop.net. Maybe? I don't know. Like I said, click the link. Here's the QR code. Check it all out if you would like to support the show. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one. Go Spurs, go.